Okay, so welcome back to the archive. So today we're going to talk about Lady Murasaki. Lady Murasaki. So this is from the Great Courses. Dr. Joyce Salisbury is the one who narrates and did the research for this. 36 great warriors, intellectuals, and queens. Today we're going back to Asia. We're looking at Japan and we're looking at an intellectual. And so this is the year 1000. Could you imagine the year 1000? Oh, actually, okay. So remember a couple of days at the one of the episodes, I was wondering, excuse me, how we transitioned from BCE to CE. So somebody was explaining to me this week that BCE now means before. Oh shitters, I forgot. 1 second. Let me look at my notes. Before Central. 1 second. I remembered what it was. It was before Common Era. So before the Common Era, but basically just means before Jesus Christ, but before when Christ was born. And then CE is Common Era. And so they were explaining to me that because they had a dinosaur, they were talking about a dinosaur. And so I was asking about the Ice Age. Remember, I wanted to know when the Ice Age was. So this person explained to me that the Ice Age was 10 million years ago, 10,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. I really should pull up the notes. Um, they were telling me that the Ice Age was 10,000 years ago. But the Earth itself is, okay, here it is. Common era, but so then I was like, so how old is the planet? Like, how old is time? And they were saying we are 500 million years into time. The Earth is 500 million years. I can wrap my head around that. 500 million years. So like that was like when the Big Bang would have started. So then when did Adam and Eve happen? Is my next question, right? According to the Bible, because again, science versus religion. Science says Big Bang. Religion says it's God before it all. It was the Word, and the Word was God. So when was that? Apparently, Earth is like 500 million years old. The Ice Age was 10,000. No, 1000. Girl, I got it. Time is just to me. Time is an illusion. So it doesn't even like the like it just all of it to me is like not real, but it is real. So, anyways, we are going to year 1000. Okay, year 1000. At this time, the capital city of Japan is Heian-kyō. It was moved there in 794, which had began the Heian period. It began under the influence of the Chinese Tang dynasty. If you remember when we did Wu Zetian, she broke in between the Tang dynasty. So the Tang dynasty, then she ruled for 15 years, and then the Tang dynasty ruled again. So in 794, the Heian period in Japan started, and it was influenced by the Chinese Tang dynasty. So by the 11th or the 12th century, it became known as Kyoto, which is what it's still known as today, Kyoto. So Japan had adopted Buddhism, they had adopted Chinese writing, and there was a lot of Chinese influence, including Confucianism's hierarchy. Remember, we talked about hierarchy, everybody looks to the emperor, and then, basically you just go down from there, women are at the bottom. And the same with the concubines, remember? So the emperor had a lot of concubines, similar in Japan because of the Chinese influence. Now, Japan broke from this influence and these ties in the 9th century. Okay, after there was Chinese instability, and Japan basically took that opportunity and Japan went its own way. So at this time, Japan is known for the arts, it's known for poetry, literature, and insert Murasaki Shikibu. Okay? Murasaki Shikibu lived in a palace complex. This period saw the rise of the samurai warriors. So they were the warrior class who protected. They were powerful. Their families ruled the land, and it's said that Lady Murasaki was a member of one of the most powerful samurai clans called Fujiwara. The Fujiwara. So she was associated with the Fujiwara samurai clan, and she should have been. It said that she's probably born around 973. We don't know her given name because girls' names weren't recorded at that time. Again, like women and girls weren't seen as like really mattering, and so we don't really know her actual name, her first name, because it wasn't recorded. And so instead, Murasaki is actually the name of one of her characters in a book she wrote. So her name isn't actually Lady Murasaki, but that's how she's known based on a book that she wrote. And then her last name is Shibuku is the surname is what is remembered. It means Bureau of Ceremonial, which is a post that her father held. Okay, so he was an accomplished poet himself. He was a tutor. He was a tutor of a crown prince, and so he basically had an insider um, access to the prince and to royalty. So her father was a tutor. He himself was a poet. Um, he taught her Chinese calligraphy and how to write and read Chinese. And she then began to write fine poetry, right? She learned it from her father, as I said. Her father was said that it said that he wished she had been born a boy because she was smarter than her brother. And so again, see these themes of like fathers really pouring into their daughters and daughters really being like intelligent, and like often smarter than their brothers. No shade. And so basically, in 994, her father wrote a poem for the emperor. So it said that her father wrote a poem for the emperor, and it was so brilliant. The poem was so good that the emperor named her father governor of Ichizen province. So father writes a poem about the emperor. The emperor's like, chef's kiss. This is incredible. I'm going to appoint you emperor of the Ichizen province. And so Lady Murasaki at this time is 21 years old, and she travels with her father to the Ichizen province. She goes with him. She stays for about 2 years. And at that time, her father arranged for her to marry a man named Fujiwara no Nobutaka. Nobutaka. Fujiwara no Nobutaka. And so he was in her 40s and she was in her 20s, right? And so he also had other wives at the time. She has a daughter in 999. Could you imagine being like, my date of birth is 999? Oh my God, that's a girl, numerology girly. That's incredible. So her daughter's born. They name her daughter Kenji, and Kenji also became a poet as well too. So you see the generations. Her father's a poet, she's a poet, her daughter's also a poet. And so in 1001, Lady Murasaki's husband dies, and she lives the rest of her life as a widow. Okay? So once he dies, she dove even more into her poetry and prose, and she's known at that time to write a novel. So she wrote a novel called The Tale of Genji, and it is considered the first novel of all time, like ever. Again, not another thing that Joyce said at the end is like, yes, there was other people were writing prose, but she was the first, or hers was the first that was well known and printed. Okay, so Tales of Genji is considered the first novel. Is said to stand up to Jane Austen. Again, I hate this idea that we always have to compare folks of color, people of color, Asians, Africans, Black people to white people in order for it to like have some sort of a claim, right? It was so good. It was like Jane Austen. How come it can't be good on its own? But again, that's what Dr. Joyce said. And so the story is about the life of an emperor's son named Genji, who later falls in love and has an affair with his stepmother. What is the obsession with stepmothers, step siblings? Um, I was recently looking, not well, it's been a while now, but I was looking at one of the porn sites, and there was like, it's like apparently the most popular porn lately is like stepbrother, stepsister, stepmother. Like, what is you guys' obsession with people sleeping with their step stuff? This is weird, but this is what the book was about. So Genji basically falls in love with his stepmother because his stepmother looked like his dead mother. And that's the same reason his father married her, is because the woman looked like Genji's dead mother. Okay. And so he falls in love with his stepmom. He makes love to her. They have a son. The son takes the throne. Genji then falls in love with his wife's niece. So he falls in love with. This is the story from Tale of Genji, right? This is the first novel. So Genji falls in love with his stepmom, makes love to her, marries her, has a daughter, has a son who takes the throne. Then he falls in love with his wife's niece. The wife's niece is Murasaki. Okay, and so Murasaki becomes his second wife and his greatest love. Genji is completely in love with Lady Murasaki. She eventually dies, and Genji falls from grace. Dr. Joyce says that the summary doesn't do it justice. It doesn't do the novel justice. Like you have to read. I've never read the novel. The English translation is over 1,000 pages, and it has over 430 characters over 4 generations. So it's a really long book, and it does a deep dive into 4 generations worth, over 430 characters, and it was also illustrated beautifully. Apparently, it's just beautiful illustrations um, of the 12th century. And the scroll that it was originally illustrated on is said to have been 450 feet long, over 100 paintings. And you can see the paintings now, today, at the Tokugawa Art Museum and the Gotha Museum. And so if you go to the Gotha Museum in Japan or the Tokugawa Museum in Japan, you can see this art. I'm gonna go to Japan actually. I've been wanting to go to Japan. I saw recently that Japan is calling in folks because you can move into Japanese cities for like pretty cheap right now. You know how they were doing it in Italy? Move here and you could buy. I think I saw that something similar is going on with Japan. So I would love to go to Japan, but okay, so she also wrote a diary. She kept a diary as well too, which is really well known. That also gives us a deep dive on Japanese culture at this time. She wrote about the weather. She wrote about nature. She wrote about public events. So she gives us basically her personal information, right? What she was feeling, the different lives from 1008 to 1010. She writes in her diary, right? So she shows what life is like in Japan during the 11th century. She talks about the rise of the samurai class, just basically giving us a take on the private human emotions and the different beauty ideals of the time. I saw there was a show I was watching recently. I don't remember what show it was, but they were making fun of somebody. It was like she looks like the type to write about the weather in her journal, in her diary, and like it was supposed to be a joke, but I was like, yeah, I hope so. That's brilliant. Like it might seem boring now, but for somebody again in 2000, this is what 1,000 years ago, right? Um, Looking back, you get to see the day to day what life was like then. That's actually fascinating to somebody in the future, right? It might be boring right here in the now, but to a historian 2,000 years from now, they get intimate details of what is going on, what life is like, right? Wow, look at this account from the pandemic. Wow, look what happened when Hurricane Melissa happened. This was what the weather was like. It might seem boring to us now, but to somebody in the future, it's just like, it's juicy, you know? So you guys are just, we just, people, the things people consider boring, I just think is like folks in the future are gonna fucking eat it up. You guys are just don't, you just catch up, catch up. You know, writing about the weathers is something we make fun of now, but Lady Murasaki was doing that in year 1000, and historians are eating it up right now because they get to see what the weather was like. Like, what was the weather like on that on this day? I think that's so fascinating. Again, I'm a social science nerd, so I find that fascinating. I'll just say, right, what I do now when I write in my journal, I don't keep journals anymore. I mostly just write online paper. And I had a book of poetry. So when I feel called to write, I just try to turn everything into poetry right now. It's not always poetry. It's just most of the time it's just streams of consciousness. But what you might find boring, somebody might love in 2,000 years. So just some food for thought. So, anyways, in 1005, she was summoned to the court to wait on the Empress Shoshi. So Empress Shoshi calls Lady Murasaki to the palace, said that they were distant relatives, and she documented the rank in society. Unlike China and in Rome, Japan didn't have repressive roles for women, right? Japan was more like Vietnam. They were a little bit more lenient. Women had a little more sexual liberty. Um, and so married women lived apart from their husbands and they visited them periodically, but both men and women took lovers and had affairs, is what Joyce says. And a child was only considered legitimate if the father accepted it. So adultery was a matter of romance, right? So very much it's giving Marie Champagne, right? Remember Marie Champagne in France was like, adultery, romance is when it's giving something similar. And so jealousy is also reflected in Lady Murasaki's work. There are two types of women that is said to come out of this era. One is the flirtatious women who are attractive and seductive. They were said to make bad wives in the long run, and it was better to marry a woman who was talented and could hold a conversation, who did poetry and had patience, right? Because the seductress was good for a mistress. We still see these themes, right? Um, you want to find like the boring wife, the girl who is a good one, the sexually liberated girls are just good for mistresses. We still see those kind of dichotomous themes, the femme fatale kind of narratives versus um, whatever. You know what I'm saying. And so her writings, a lot of attention is given to beauty at that time in Japan. And I think still to some extent, it was white skin was really, really attractive. And so they would they would give their skin a whiter tone by mixing rice powder with mercury, which is terrible. Like, mercury is so bad. You hear about like mercury and like tin tuna and stuff, and it's not good for you. But rice powder and mercury, it would turn the girls' faces white, and then they would paint their lips red and small. But then their teeth, because their skin was so white, they bleached their teeth black, and so dark black. And so this was like the ideal beauty at that time: dark black teeth, red round lips, small red round lips, and white with jet black hair, right? And they wear their hair long down. It said that it would sweep to over 23 feet, which was different than the Chinese who would put their hair up. And so another mark of beauty was the layers of kimono. So they would wear like 12 layers of kimono, and it would take sometimes two servants to help dress them. This was setting the seeds for the geisha, right? So it was just the beginning of the era for the geisha. Poetry was used to make oneself also beautiful. I love the idea that poetry was used to make oneself beautiful. That's so incredible. Now we see poetry as like cringe. Then it was like if you weren't a poet, if you didn't know how to speak poetry, you were like a peasant, right? Because poetry was life at that time. The kanbun was respected style of writing. It was a domain for men, but her dad taught Lady Murasaki, and basically it was Chinese and Japanese characters. Chinese logos or Japanese characters, the kanbun. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it properly. So it was supposed to be something men did. She knew how to do it. She taught the Empress this, but they had to kind of hide it because, again, it was something men were supposed to do. Women were not supposed to do it, right? And so they hid it, but she taught the Empress how to write it. She also taught the Empress how to read and write kana and hiragana, which is the basis of Japanese writing today. They were developed in Heian courts by women writers, not educated men of the court. So she wrote her poetry in kana, and men wrote poetry in Manyogana. Again, I'm so sorry if I'm pronouncing these right. Manyogana poetry, which formed the basis of all social interactions, right? Children learn to write by writing and memorizing poetry. They didn't always have to rhyme, but they were 575, which is called the haiku, or the 577 form, which is called the tanka. And so the form gave it the structure to express beauty, wit, and elegance. And the Tale of Genji, remember the first novel that was ever written by Lady Murasaki? It contained 795 poems. 795 poems were found in the Tale of Genji. And so she wrote another book of poetry, and basically poetry was a queen of literature, so she was that girl. She was really that girl at the time. Prose was a lower level, but she still wrote prose, right? Which is what the Tale of Genji is. So women wrote fictional tales to entertain each other. She, so that's what I already said. She wrote the first prose. It revealed the universal truths. The Tale of Genji was printed 5 times. There's 5 editions of it, and it was translated to English in 1650. So in 1650, the Tales of Genji was um, translated into English. Oh no, maybe it was no, it was translated. I'm so sorry. It was translated to English in 1935, but by 1650, there was already 5 editions. So yeah, if you go to Japan today, Lady Murasaki is honored on the 2,000 yen, the dollar, the currency note. So you can see her influence on the 2,000 yen. Her diary shows her book being popular, and this led to a lot of jealousy. So once her book was printed, it just caused some tensions between her friend circle because a lot of the other women were jealous of her. Um, it created a lot of animosity, and it isolated her from the other people because people are like, oh, she thinks she's so good, and so it created some tension between her and her girls. So the last recorded date of her was in 1013, and she died at 41, and she's buried in Kyoto, where her tomb is today. And so that is Lady Murasaki of Japan, the Fujiwara samurai clan. She's known to have written the first novel and a prose, and yeah, her diaries can take us back to that time period of what it was like to live in Japan in the 11th century, which is the year 1000, right? So that's a little bit about her. I'm going to end it there. Again, go Jays go. Until next time, in solidarity.